Back live tonight here on In Focus. DA leader John Steenhuisen says the coalition convention isn't only aimed at unseating the ANC, but to unite parties to fix the country. 7 political parties have gathered in Kempton Park to try and establish a pact ahead of the 2024 elections. Let's get some analysis on that, joined now by Dr Ongama Mtimka. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. Well, we know now that it's no longer called a moonshot pact, but a multi-party charter for South Africa. The politics of that, of course, says a lot about what the other smaller parties are actually saying to the Democratic Alliance around who is actually going to be leading this coalition, should it take off.
Yeah, so I think we've seen concerted efforts both from the government as well as these parties to try and create a structured approach on how to better engage in order to constitute coalitions should the ANC drop below 50% next year. There's a lot of sensitivity that has been there demonstrated by the parties based on the experience with coalitions since 2016. Some of the themes have been anxiety about any of the allies, particularly the DA, that shows a too much running ahead of the pack in terms of its attitude and approach in terms of how it engages others. So there's been a strong demand for equality. There's been a strong demand for, parties retaining their identities and engaging on equal terms. So it didn't surprise that this was one of the demands to have the pact named correctly, because it had come out of the politics of the Democratic Alliance. But also you see that there's an attempt in the process of trying to, lock in the partners so that they limit the extent to which either of them can turn their back on the agreement and end up entering into a deal with the parties that they say they want to keep out of government.
If they want to retain their identity, I mean, Freedom Front Plus, Democratic Alliance, IFP, Action SA, United Independent Movement, we don't know much about them, or the Independent South African National Civic Organization, we don't know much about them, but at least we know more or less the identity of these other 4 parties. How is that going to be possible in the context of a South Africa that is transitioning and that is talking about things like redress, that is talking about things like equity in employment and in other ways?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So the thing to note is that ideologically these parties are mainly center-right parties to far-right parties. So they're not distant from each other as far as policy thinking is concerned, even though there may be slight nuances here and there. But also, what we should bear in mind is that what pragmatic imperatives are driving these parties to club together more than issues of ideology. But they are aware, for example, of the opposite of the political spectrum, which is the center-left to far-left parties, whom they do not want to emerge. So in terms of that, I think it's a matter of practicality and allowing what we would call in systems theory emergence to play its course before entertaining discussions about whether to formalize this pact in a way that actually seeks to create a more permanence and homogeneity in terms of how they are organized. I listened to Peter Groenewald, for example, making the point that this is uniting in diversity, so to speak, in not exactly those words, but he was keen to make this point that they're exploring ways to collaborate, and the intention is not for each of these parties to lose their identities, but to find common ground on which to actually build a potentially workable coalition.
Well, we've seen, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, how the Democratic Alliance handled the emergence. And it wasn't pretty, and which is why they are not there right now. I mean, are they in a space where they are able to handle what comes out of it?
In fact, it was quite interesting in Herman Mashaba's input in the opening remarks, this question of if we are structuring something for 2024, and this is supposed to be something that makes us collaborate a lot more together as these parties, what do we do with the pressing situation of the people of Joburg now, where these parties that are our arch rivals, as per the language of this coalition, are already in government? And that, I thought that was quite interesting. So you are seeing a lot of pull factors around questions of, if we want to unite in future, what are we doing about a situation now that can in fact be an acid test of how committed we are to this ideal of working together? I thought that was quite an interesting line. Anyway, what is interesting for me, Thabo, is that this multi-party coalition pact appears that it is carving politics in South Africa as a two-party, towards two groupings, even though there are multiple parties involved. And I started asking myself, and I've been theorizing about this phenomenon as dynamic fragmentation, the breaking up of South African political parties into smaller parties, which, even though some small parties are exiting the system, there seems to be a permanence, or small parties as a phenomenon appear to be a very permanent feature of our politics, even as particular small parties come and go. But it's interesting that this arrangement of looking for numbers might just sow the seeds for what would eventually become a two-party state in South Africa. It remains to be seen. It may be that they work so well together under this arrangement where each has got relative freedom to be a self-assertive party, while at the same time working with others to create a center-right grouping, which is against or is up against a center-left grouping led by the African National Congress.
The grand coalition, or this talk of a grand coalition between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, is that just a distraction, or, I mean, as it seems to the Good Party and maybe even the Patriotic Alliance, is a real deal breaker as far as these coalitions are concerned?
If it were to ever be a possibility, it would arise out of compromise. It's not the intention of either of these parties, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, as I see things, to actually want to willfully, form a coalition together. So if it were to ever happen, it would be a result of a compromise. And I don't think we should rule out possibilities at this stage. The fact of the matter is that the ANC, in my view, is not going to decline such that together with the EFF, they are under 50% significantly. And in fact, it may be that the ANC may be able to group together a few of the splinter parties that are contesting centrist politics to center, and caught up somewhere between center right and center left, and be able to constitute a coalition which may neither involve the Democratic Alliance nor the EFF. In that case, the question becomes, how much opportunism will be there among these parties that are desirous of forming this big grand coalition to actually jump ship and join a more politically viable coalition. And I think that this is why this is going to be a very thorny issue in terms of the nature of agreement and declaration that is achieved by these parties. None of them are going to completely want to lock themselves so much in that it would make it completely impossible for them to actually factor in a viability discussion or a viability variable when it comes to actually constituting a coalition shortly after the elections next year.
So would you say it's not even desirable, for example, for a party like the Patriotic Alliance to tie itself down to an agreement that says, no, we will not form a coalition with the ANC, even though they would like the Democratic Alliance to sign such an agreement?
So my sense is that even if they sign such an agreement, when it is time to have coalitions formed, the behavior that we have seen in municipalities is still going to be at play. It's going to take a lot of maturity in the political system in South Africa for political parties not to be, narrowly minded and think about their own benefits as much as they try to create a mutually beneficial arrangement that can benefit a group of opposition parties next year. I think that tendency to want to secure a deal that best works for a particular party is always going to be a factor that kind of precludes loyalty to this coalition. And that's why, in my view, I think that there's going to be a strong push for having the kind of agreements which may allow one of the players to actually take another to court should they fail to adhere to the agreement. And if they are able to actually structure an agreement that helps them to challenge another in court, should they break out of the agreement, it would be a very interesting step in coalition politics in the country, because so far there hasn't been a kind of agreement that would actually bring in a legalistic element to the freedom of each of the parties to choose with whom they want to be in a coalition. And in fact, that's been the source of instability. The freeness that each of the parties have to actually come out of a coalition and help the party that's sitting in opposition benches to unseat the current coalition in which they may be partners in, because the other party is promising to give them a better position should they be successful in toppling a coalition that a particular party may be a member of.
Let's push your theory on a two-party state a little bit further. I mean, the absence of the UDM, Patriotic Alliance, and PAC, ACDP, maybe Al-Jamaa in this national convention. Do you think that is a permanent feature, or is it something that they might consider at a later stage? I'm asking that because I'm saying, are we not in a situation where we might see three coalition formations happening in the country, where it could be the DA-led multi-party charter for South Africa, and maybe those parties, ATM, EFF, UDM, forming some kind of formation, and the ANC with whoever they'll be able to get?
I'm going to borrow a pre-94 word of Congress politics. So if you look at those parties, they are not opposed to, as it were, Congress politics or the politics of the ANC. So the politics of when this event has taken place is that it's shortly after there has been a national dialogue on coalitions. And I think that is not unrelated to who was in the discussions today. I think that all of them are open for to be invited in platforms where they can shape discussions about what animal the environment for coalition formation gets to become next year. I think that the parties are being strategic at this stage. they don't want to give either of the big parties, the DA and the ANC, an impression that they have them in their pockets. And so when they have an impression that things are not proceeding on equal terms, they are going to try and assert themselves so that this debate continues to an extent that, or to such an extent that they may feel that the environment is inclusive enough as far as attitude is concerned by these big parties, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and also that they feel they have space enough to be able to actually contribute to the process without losing their assertiveness. I think this is going to be something that so what Peter Grunewald had, I think General Olomisa would have more of. Do not think that you are convening us to a space where we must dance to your own tune. We want to retain our independence. We want to retain our right to associate with whomever we may want to associate. So they're going to resist any platform where they see is a potential to lock them in until they feel that all the parties are negotiating on equal terms.
Dr. Ongama Mtimka, appreciate your intervention tonight. That's analysis there from Dr. Ongama Mtimka of the new, or shall I say, the National Convention taking place on collisions there in Kempton Park. More news when we return. Stay with us.